Welcome again to another episode of Friday Drinks. Thank you very much for joining us. I think it was a busy week, but nonetheless an exciting week. So much is happening, but more importantly is the weather. It has actually changed. It's getting colder. What do you think?
Yeah, cold weather, always a problem for, for some of us who are used to.
Are you going to survive this winter? You look like you're under the weather.
Oh, look, I'll certainly survive as usual, but yeah, I struggle with winters. Look, I come from a part of the country which is usually maybe the lowest temperatures that we get will be like 23, 24, somewhere in the low velds. So we are not used. Our winters are like your typical summers in Harare. So I'm sure you understand the context.
Wow.
I don't like winters. I can deal with the heat in one form or another. I'm sure that's why I teach Tisiri Kuchando. Otherwise,
Okay, so we'll warm you up with an Oriental hibiscus tea, Mutombo, something that Sekai makes, or I think it's Sekai's daughter who actually makes this, and we still have it. It's all sorts of concoction.
Yeah, a good friend of ours, Sekai Kovarika, the CEO of CZI.
Yeah. It's called the Mutombo Magic. I don't know what that is, but it always...
I know that Mutombo from Indao means medicine.
Medicine, yeah. Well, it's got a bit of magic in there. And I'm hoping that this will warm you up. And
he's been under the weather for the last 2-3 weeks, so he needs all the help he can get.
Thank you so much.
Get well soon, brother.
I hope it will help.
Let's hope yourselves. Tell us afterwards.
Yeah, certainly I'll do.
And we can give Sekai feedback. And Shumba,
if it's got healing powers. Oh yeah, on the more interesting side of the bar, I've got a gift from our friend Gloria. I've never had this before. It's a South African wine. It's called Great Expectations Triangle, and it's a blend of Cab Sauv Merlot and Petit Verdot. I'm very grateful to have this award-winning wine, and sadly, I don't have another imbiber to enjoy it with. But
we'll join you in spirit. And the golf, what did you guys think of the Zimbabwean Open?
No, it was an interesting crowd. It was good to get out of the studio and set up somewhere on a bright sunny day and interact with a completely different set of individuals. I thought, I've always found the golf world fascinating. And I enjoyed those conversations. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think every time we broadcast outside, I think it's always refreshing, and it's something that we need to do more of. And in fact, next week we're in Victorial Falls with the mining indaba. Yeah. Would you like to talk about that? Because clearly, you love the crew. You've bought them new equipment. Traveling gear.
I love the show. I love everyone. I love you guys. So next week we will be at in the Victorial Falls for a Chamber of Mines Congress, I think, annual Congress they call it. So just 2 days ago, Flora and I, we actually went to the Chamber of Mines offices just to get, where they were sharing with the media the program for the event. It looks like it's actually a pegged kind of program with the important who is who in the mining world being there. And those guys are always very difficult to pin down for a chat or a discussion. So we are so excited about that. Like I've said, every time we are invited, we always take that quite seriously. So we are grateful to be in the
and the sponsors are coming on board. Well done.
Yes, certainly. So we are quite grateful that last Friday, Delta, through their Golden Pilsner brand, hosted us at the Zim Open, and they were a very good host. We had good fun, even after the recording I wouldn't want to ask you what time we left that place. Some of us, I'm sure they were the very last ones to be told, guys. Yeah, so it was just look,
this is a really good wine.
Yeah, a very good outing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Cheers, Gloria.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the corporate sponsors that are coming on board. We will certainly represent your brands very well. We are trying to do our best. That's why.
Who's sponsoring our trip to Victorial Falls?
I think for now I'll keep it hush hush, but it's one of the leading banks that would want to. I'm not quite sure whether I'm supposed to say or not. So that's why at this point I'll just say we are going there courtesy of firstly the Chamber of Mines themselves, but also partners in the banking sector.
Yeah. I think it's just to acknowledge that we really do appreciate what the sponsors are able to do. That's the only way we're able to produce a show on a weekly basis. I mean, passion is the reason why we get here every Friday and we're on show. But, it's not just passion that you need. You need to oil the passion. So every sponsor out there, people who are fans of the show, please do chip in and let's keep the show going. I think, Zia has done a fantastic job with the crew, I must say. They
you sound like you're jealous.
Very professional. I am. But I'm giving him the correct kudos. He's really equipped the crew appropriately, and I think that the show can only grow from here, and especially with our sponsoring partners, that will actually help the show. So this is an invite to more sponsors to come on board. Just to give you a glimpse, I think we've got the right people who actually watch the show. It's always very exciting to hear the sort of people who, you come across and they're like, oh, you know what, I always watch you and you guys are doing a great job. So that's feedback that, when you are sponsoring our show, you will get the right audience. Are you looking forward to Victorial Falls?
Yeah, I'm quite excited. I think, the mining sectors, when you think about us as a country, and one of our competitive advantages is our natural resource endowment, which is quite rich. And we just don't seem to get the right level of capital, to fully exploit our endowment. So it'll be interesting to get into the weeds of that. What are the constraints? What are the challenges? We've got gold at an all-time high. You're a gold bug. Are you delighted?
It's come off. I was gonna pick that up with you because it's come off about 10%, primarily because certainty is returning to the markets and Trump is behaving. And his trip to Middle East, I thought that was quite phenomenal in many regards, if you think about it, especially with regards to Syria and what he managed to do, what the Syrians managed to do, which is get the sanctions off and a rebirth and reignite Syria, which has been really in the doldrums for the last 20 years. So I think that was a significant thing that I saw in the Middle East. But I thought that that's again an opportunity for Zimbabwe, especially when you look at our debt review that Adesina and Chisano have been pushing. I think the terms are very clear, and it's something that we could potentially do with a Trump administration. But I could be, I could be misled. Could you give us your analysis of what's actually happening internationally, especially with regards to Trump and what we saw in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, when the discussion started, after the so-called Liberation Day, when these very high tariffs were announced, it was very messy and it caused a lot of volatility and uncertainty. And you're certainly right to point out that that's probably what drove up the gold price, because gold is a safe haven asset. So when there's uncertainty and volatility, and people are feeling risk averse, they rush to buy gold. And I think the gold price coming off is a reflection of, the deal that was negotiated with the Chinese. It looks like, tariffs, the outlook is that they'll be resolved and they will be lower all around. And so there's some certainty. I thought you'd actually mention and give Trump kudos for all the commercial deals that he announced. I think this is when business and political leaders work well together. He traveled all the way to the Middle East
with lots of business people.
With very senior, successful entrepreneurs and business leaders. And it wasn't just a talk show, where they, had wonderful speeches and issued platitudes. They actually penned deals, and big deals at that, like I think Boeing managed to get an order for 160 billion, and Nvidia also sold a bunch of chips, and there were substantive deals announced.
Ranga, what do you make of Trump's foreign trip, first foreign trip being to the Middle East? I mean, of all places. Does this bode well for his Nobel Prize?
Well, there's a lot that has been happening in the Middle East. Whether it's in Yemen, it's in Palestine, with Gaza and
Israel.
And Israel, yes. And also, it has been, there has been a lot of tension, Iran and all these countries. So I think maybe if one wants to sort of speculate and say, what's the key sort of geopolitical headache for President Trump? I would say it's actually the Middle East. His attitude towards the Ukraine-Russia issues is totally different from the Democrats. He doesn't really see that as a big issue. He actually thinks that he can force them to have a deal. He doesn't see Ukraine as a victim and so on and so forth. And his attitude has been one where he's going there for business. And I really liked some of the comments that that were coming, that he actually sees is actually impressed by how the Middle East has actually managed to develop its economy using internal resources that they didn't look out to foreigners to try and put in some money into those countries. And I was just thinking that I think it's a big lesson even for Africans, that I think if we need the world to take us seriously, we also need to take ourselves seriously. Things that we can do internally, let's do them. And then when we engage with the outside world, I think we need to start moving away from this mentality of seeing them as donors. Let's see them as business partners.
That's quite something. And let's correctly contextualize it that Ranga has said. And I'm particularly keen to hear your view on this, because I think that Trump is coming up with a Trumpian way of looking at geopolitics and the philosophy around America and its place in the greater society. And here he's attacking really, you've got the neocons and Bush, going into Iraq and imposing himself and imposing American ideals on Iraq. And then you've got the Obama years, again, his speech around liberalism and what liberalism can do to the world. In fact, preaching. So both parties were preaching. And then Trump has come up with his own way or his own philosophy of looking at this. And he's saying, gone are the days when America will preach to the rest of the world. What's your take on that?
I think it's fantastic. He's a president. He's not a pope. He's not. His job is not to pontificate and moralize and lecture. The rest of the world.
Except when he's running a meme on X.
And I think the takeaway from a Zimbabwean perspective is there's always been this tension where we feel, that the West is talking down to us. And they have no right to do so. The way I would look at it from a Zimbabwean perspective is that we can actually do business with the Trump administration because they're not going to moralize. They're just going to look at it from the perspective of, does it make sense for them? And I think that there are a lot of opportunities where we can do a win-win, So I think it's an opportunity for us to refresh our relationship and explore all the business opportunities fully, because I think there's been some sort of historical tension, and I think we're in a new era where that tension is not there anymore, and the Americans seem to be open to doing deals with everyone.
Except the South Africans. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, we saw, the Afrikaner refugees, about 80 of them, landing in Washington and being received by a senior member of the administration, the American administration. And, they've got special permits as refugees in America. What's your take? Trump, with everybody else is willing to do a deal, but it doesn't look like it with South Africans. For whatever reason, he's mad at the South Africans.
Yeah, I think there's a big issue that is playing out between the US, or President Trump's US, and the South Africans. And obviously, what you are seeing, those are not refugees. I didn't see any refugees from there. And look, I think Africa is on short of refugees. I mean, people that are really
who live in war zones.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Every day there are so many people that are trying to cross, from Africa into Europe. Quite a number of them are dying on the seas and whatever. And these are people who really want to get out of Africa for one reason or another. And there are wars in some of these African countries, and even also maybe Middle East. So clearly it's not really about the refugees. Look, it's good for them. They got an opportunity to try
life in the first world.
Life in the first world. But for most of them, if you want to, for example, if someone was a farmer, I don't think they'll enjoy life in the US, because all the privileges that they were used to, they'll be gone like the moment that they land in the US. And a very interesting question I was asked of whether if they decide to come back, or what will happen. And the response was, they have to renounce their refugee status. You can't be saying, I'm running away from this country. But every now and then, I want to be able to go back and check out what's happening there. It doesn't make sense.
I think, to be honest and to be real, not that I'm, taking any side in this case, but the reason why
you don't have an opinion?
No, I do have an opinion, but I just want to first state the case of why anyone would want American refugee status. It's because you get free housing and your kids get to go to school for free and free healthcare. I think that on its own, if you are not doing so well in South Africa, then that presents a very good case, and you can go to the sunnier side of America and enjoy the sun, and you've got free healthcare and free education for your kids. So if you've got young kids, this is an opportunity to give them, a step in the right direction. So I'm just saying that there are pull and push factors. But more importantly, I think that Ramaphosa has a lot to do, especially with G20 that's happening in South Africa in October. And I think that the rhetoric is not helping South Africa. And I wish that they would actually recognize that Trump is a transactional president, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we should take advantage of. And I'm laying the ground for our conversation with the American ambassador sometime in June. So every week we want to start discussing American politics and American view in the world, and what it actually means, and what we can and how we can benefit from it. And please, as an audience, please help us by getting into the discussion. And by the time we get to the ambassador, we'll have very succinct questions and how best we can also progress as Zimbabwe. Because I think it's an opportunity for Zimbabwe. What would a deal look like, as far as you're concerned, between Zimbabwe and America?
Okay, before I get into that, I actually wanted to double click on the South Africa issue. I actually have opprobrium for the South African government in this instance. It's a PR disaster. This, whether this refugee crisis, the US is the world's largest economy. They've got the biggest capital markets in the world. And South Africa's tourism is a big and important sector, and I'm sure American tourists are a material part of that. So it's important for them to have good relations with the US, and I think in this particular instance, the perception differs from reality. I think Zia's touched on it a little in terms of, are they really refugees, compared to people who are actually living in war zones, who are actually
perhaps look like refugees.
Exactly.
But also to the extent that there are farming communities in South Africa where there's an appalling level of violent crime. The state should be seen to be stepping up and should be trying to help them and make them feel more secure. That's really what one of the roles of government, right, is to maintain law and order. And part of that is when there are communities who feel like they are vulnerable, especially vulnerable to violent crime, the state should step in and show force and show commitment to their security. And again, it's some of it can just be performative, just making a statement, sending doing a
well, perhaps not calling your bill expropriation bill.
Yeah. Okay. So
without conversation.
This is and we're not even we haven't even touched the Expropriation Act, right? We're just talking about this particular PR kerfuffle with these images of refugees, right? And so I think it's very important for the South Africans to get the narrative correct, to be seen to be, because there's people have described what's happening there as genocide, and that's just awful for them as a country to be having this conversation. I think they need to really step up their PR game and change the perception.
Okay, Zia, we saw again America. Well, I think it was Rubio, Secretary of State, who signed a deal with the DRC. And we're starting to see peace, some sort of peace. But they did deals with minerals and rare earth minerals as well. And they will start doing the processing, because it turns out that China does a lot of the processing rare earth. So rare earth, you can find rare earth minerals elsewhere around the world, but the critical thing is the processing.
Yeah, most of the processing capacity is in China.
Processing capacity is actually in China. And as a way of divesting from that particular risk, America is looking elsewhere, and that's why they're looking at Ukraine, but they're also looking seriously at the DRC. What could Zimbabwe offer Trump that could actually work for our cause?
We should be going to the Americans and say, you know what, we know you are looking for this, we have them. So
do we have rare earth?
Maybe we may not have rare earth, but we have got some minerals that they may need. You see, so I don't think the American demand is just limited to the rare earth. So we should be able to to go to them with what we have.
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we learned from the South African, debacle is the current American president and the administration has a particular affinity for these white folks, these ex-farmers. And I think that if we extend that olive branch and we give the ex-farmers, $1 billion and say, yes, this is what happened in the past, but the past is the past. We're doing it according to the Constitution. Here's $1 billion. I think that the relations with America would thaw, and we could potentially do a deal. And I think that the deal is necessary. If a lot of people always say that, we shouldn't compensate the ex-white farmers. But if you think about it, if we pay $1 billion, we have the potential to unlock 10 to 12 billion US dollars, because if 70% of our debt is actually cancelled or forgiven, because a lot of it is just interest and penalties, and it means that we are able to then go into the international markets and gain something. So to me, it's like a cost that is necessary for us to leverage on the potential to raise even more money. What we've seen with Qatar, people always look at Qatar and say, but think about it. It's an economy that's smaller than South Africa in terms of GDP. But when you look at its sovereign wealth, when you look at the amount of money that they actually hold as cash or near cash, there's so much that they can do. When you look at Saudi, that is why America is there. And I think that a deal that ensures that we say the past is the past with the white farmers, and we legalize our processes and our farms, and people can get full title because the previous owners have been fully compensated or partially compensated. I think it opens the doorway for debt cancellation and also us moving forward.
I'm going to be a little bit unkind and accuse you of thinking small. I actually think there's an opportunity to, if you think about our country, call us 25 billion GDP. If you think about our national debt, same sort of numbers. The amount that's due to the commercial farmers, if we agree that it ought to be paid, that's $3.5 billion.
We don't even need to pay all of it.
Yeah,
so we'll just pay $1 billion.
The point I'm trying to make is that, the kind of money that would be a massive stimulus for the Zimbabwean economy and transform our lives, 30, 40, $50 billion. That's a drop in the ocean for the Americans, right? And the reason why a lot of US capital doesn't flow into Zim is because we've got all these, macroeconomic framework problems, right? Starting with, what happens with the currency, and then it cascades from there. And what I think the opportunity is if we can get a commitment for some meaningful amounts of investments, 10, 20, $30 billion, and then have a BIPA, a bilateral agreement, where they have a waiver from all of those macroeconomic concerns. So if it's an investment in an export-facing business, they get assurances about being able to ship their money out, their dividends and capital appreciation. They get assurances, ironclad assurances, that we're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, hey, the retention is now 50% and we're going to give you ZIG, and it's just a special deal for them that opens up the door for meaningful amounts of capital to flow into our country. I think there's an opportunity to do a transaction,
I
massive
transaction. I agree, and it's not even for the Americans. It's
good for us, and it's good for them.
The current investors, if we look at the mining sector, we've got lots of people who are already in there, and if they were given those concessions, I think they will pour in a lot more money.
Absolutely. So I think there's
an opportunity there. All right, gentlemen, let's continue with the news. So we've got tobacco daily sell hits a historic high, record-breaking 7.2 million kgs of tobacco were traded. Zimbabwe's tobacco sector hit a historic milestone on May 2, 2025, with a record-breaking 7.2 million kilograms sold in a single day, the highest daily volume ever recorded. This surpasses the previous record of 6.8 million. Very strong, and we're expecting the 2025 to be on track to hit record sales. What are your thoughts there? Tobacco doing very well, and most of that tobacco ends up in China.
Tobacco is doing very well, and the positive spin-off effects are huge, because you are seeing quite a number of communal farmers producing tobacco, unlike in the past where it used to be produced by few farmers, white farmers that we're just speaking about. And you actually see that even in terms of the impact of that in the businesses. We were recently at Delta briefing, where they were talking of how numbers had sort of come off, and whenever there's a drought, and maybe things are not really going on well, say in the mining sector, especially with the gold, the Macrocosa type, they feel it. So, volumes in sorghum and also sometimes lagers are affected. But when you have got this kind of performance where the tobacco farmers are feeling quite rich as they are. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in some area where I met a few of them, and they're saying, in terms of the volumes, at least for that community or village that I went to, that was probably the highest that they had. And I remember just some young men in the rurals, they saying to me they had about 16 bells. And that's,
what does that translate to?
It say even at an average price of say $4. $4.
That's really for the commercials, but
okay, even $3, because the bill is about $120. No. In fact, they're actually telling you that price is around that $4, even for them, if you're selling early.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's like $120 by say 3 or 3.5 or 4. So that's like what?
600.
Yeah. Just on one, and by 18. So just imagine someone in the rural areas, they've got like 5,000, 12,000. That's a lot of money. Okay. So it's really going to, it's good.
I mean, we've got about 120,000 small scale producers of tobacco.
Exactly. So even if one of them was to get say 5 bells, like on average, at that number 500. That's like 5 by 5, 2.5 in the rural areas. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
So it's good.
So I think it's encouraging, but I want to add, that we could potentially do so much more, right? Because as successful as the tobacco farmers are, they do face the same constraints everybody else in agriculture faces, which is they have there's a question mark on their tenure. And that basically limits the amount of capital that they would
and the surrender, the 30
that they would deploy
30%,
or that they could attract. I mean, imagine if an industrial farming operation could enter the Zimbabwean market and take on massive pieces of land with highly, industrialized farming techniques. What would our actual, so we're producing record amounts of tobacco today, but what is our actual potential? I think that we're punching well below our weight because we've created these
There's a lot more
constraints. Yeah, and I think, we really need to sort out tenure for the farmers.
True. Industries rebel against prohibitive policy rate. Zimbabwe's industries are protesting at the high borrowing costs stemming from the Reserve Bank 35% policy rate, which commercial banks effectively raise to around 47%, hindering business recovery. So this is on ZIG. The Zimbabwean Chamber of Commerce highlighted this issue during a tense meeting with RBZ officials, pointing out that the banks justify the steep rates due to market risks. This situation also restricts access to the central bank's targeted finance facility as lenders grow increasingly cautious amid fears of rising loan defaults. Despite liquidity surpluses in the banking system, affordable credit remains scarce for businesses.
So, I mean, at 47%, we know obviously that the ZIG...
ZIG inflation is now above 80%.
Yeah. But so maybe in terms of, if you look at it, that you'd say it's still sub-inflationary.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, as a business, to borrow at 47%.
Yeah, what exactly are you doing?
You see? Yeah, it's really, there's so many, in as much as that inflation is above 80%, there are not too many businesses that actually have got that
can absorb
that
such
kind
a
of
rate.
that kind of.
And also we're seeing a depression in the economy. What's your take?
Yeah, look, I think, firstly, I want to commend the Reserve Bank and the governor for not printing for several months now. I think that's a positive development, and we need to give them kudos. We don't want to be critical and ignore some of the positives that are out there. So I'll give them kudos for not printing over the last several months. But I think there's so much more that they can do and that they should do to promote the ZIG and allow it to compete with the US dollar in terms of
Well, they
market
can start
share.
by just paying the exporters their 30% surrender.
Yeah, that's
Because they're not, they're withholding and now giving them NNCDs.
They should just make the currency fully fungible. If you're not printing, then why do you need all these exchange controls to protect the currency? And
and if gold price is actually going up,
so
almost double when you introduced gold coins.
And that retention, okay, it's, is it at the correct level at 30%? That's we can get into that discussion, but not paying people IOUs is basically a big red flag. It's one of the reasons why you don't see all this capital flowing into the country, because mines are typically built with multi-decade useful lives, right? True. And so the financiers, they build a model, with assumptions around, these things like retention. So if you make an investment today and the retention is 15%, and then in year 4 it's 30% or 40%, that can throw out your model completely.
Absolutely. Push deepens to discard $5 billion US pension redress. There's increasing momentum to abandon the US $5 billion pension compensation owed to Zimbabwean retirees after the 2008 hyperinflationary crisis wiped out savings. Livingston Magorimbo of First Mutual Holdings stated that the Zimbabwe Association of Pension Funds Congress that the pension sector is unlikely to fulfill these obligations for about $5 billion US. He likened Zimbabwe's situation to South America's countries that halted compensation efforts after similar crises, to focusing really on rebuilding. In 2009 inquiry estimated pension liabilities at 5.1 billion, exceeding Zimbabwe's GDP at the time. Despite government efforts to create compensation plans, Magorimbo believes that these are no longer viable. And this was in the Independent newspaper Friday. A very good article there by the Independent journalist. Kudos to them. Ranga, this is something that is close to your heart.
So
what's going to happen to us?
So this issue has been, has been playing out for quite some time. So yes, savings were wiped out in 2008 hyperinflation. So we were all affected. And on the other side of that, the government is now saying to the pension funds, you have to put together assets so that you can compensate everyone who was affected. Look, it sounds like a good idea for the person that was affected, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that you might actually find yourself getting some money as compensation for the losses. But it has got its own practical challenges.
The money is not there.
Exactly. So if it was wiped out, how are you going to compensate? I mean, it was wiped out. It's not there.
Don't you think that the pensioners should really direct it? Because I think they're misdirecting their anger. They should really direct it to the government of Zimbabwe. But unfortunately, that then comes back to the taxpayers.
I think there was that Judge Smith commission.
That's where this is coming from.
That is where it was coming. Exactly. And I think there's I
think the industry pushed back and said that a lot of what Judge Smith was saying was more moral arguments than the practical facts on the ground. So if you take away the morality, a lot of the pension funds, they were buying prescribed assets. They were following the law of the land.
So I haven't seen any numbers, but I would want to think that most of them actually left out. They came out of that hyperinflation so underfunded.
True.
Yeah, and I think even up to now, most of them are still underfunded because of what also then happened between 2009 and now. I think the conversation that we need to be having is we should not have a repeat of such a
That was something I was going to talk about, because that's something that I'm particularly interested in. And I want to hear what you guys think around the hyperinflation trauma and also, repetitive patterns, because this hyperinflation in Zimbabwe repeated itself after 2008 twice more in 2018 and in 2019. And there's every reason to believe that it can come back again. So how do we get out of this logjam of repetitive patterns around hyperinflation, and also how do we get over the trauma? Because this is now our lived experience, is that people are traumatized. Whenever you think or talk about savings, people don't want to hear anything around savings. And yet that's the bedrock of economic development.
So I would look to Argentina and President Milei, what he's done over there. Argentina's also had financial crises, many of them over the last few decades. They've defaulted on their debt, and they've had inflation challenges. And now you have a new guy who's doing things differently. He's libertarian. He's cutting the size of government. He's cutting spending, and he's deregulated. He's their local currency over there now trades freely. He's removed exchange controls, and he was able to get $20 billion from the IMF. And I think what's happened in Argentina is a fantastic teachable moment for us.
Success can wipe out any trauma.
Absolutely, right? Einstein quibbled that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
I beg to differ. I beg to differ with you, Rufaro, but I want to hear what Zia has to say, because we actually had some sort of success, which was the GNU. After 2008, and we actually thought, never again. But guess what we do? What we did. The warning is less on Argentina learning from us. The warning is less us learning from Argentina, but rather the reverse. Argentina
learn from us.
Should watch out because it can come back again. But trauma and repetitive patterns.
Yeah. So already it's very clear that Zimbabweans are traumatized. And everyone is already taking a sort of a defensive approach when it comes to their money. So it's not necessarily, I don't quite agree with you when you say people don't want to hear about savings. People are looking for ways to save in platforms where government doesn't have access.
Where you can't be molested by the state.
Yes, so whether for a month, for 6 months, you're putting your money, like if you're a big sort of volume kind of guy in a self-deposit box, I'm sure even at household levels, maybe under the mattress or whatever. So they still want to save because you are saving for the future. So you're seeing maybe some of them, they are investing it or saving it in some small livestock, buying goats or some goats, cow kind of projects. So what they are trying to avoid, which is commendable given the trauma, is to try and steer away from the banking sector.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
At
do
this
have
point
a
in
good
time,
point there.
I wouldn't encourage. I wouldn't encourage them to do otherwise.
Okay, you've got a good point there. We know that the informal sector, purportedly, has close to $2 billion US, and the formal sector only has 700 million. So that tells you that yes, you are right that people are still saving, but far away from the state. And we see that also with Zimbabweans rushing into property as a haven against a volatile economy. Zimbabweans are snapping up properties as safe haven against currency uncertainty and the frequent economic policy U-turns that have scared off investors. What's your take on that? We've seen the stock market, hardly moving, and people preferring, even the pension funds, preferring property rather than investing in capital markets.
Yeah, look, sadly, it's a policy issue. People have, lost money previously, once bitten, twice shy, right? So to this day, there are people who own Old Mutual shares and PPC shares that they can't get value for because somebody decided that you shouldn't be allowed to trade them. And a lot of the shareholders of these are people who never engaged in the power market, pension funds, highly regulated institutions that were making investments for their customers and can't break the law, right? So when events like that happen, they traumatize investors, and so somebody who would ordinarily just pick up the phone and call their stockbroker to deploy, $10,000 or $50,000, they're much more comfortable keeping it at home in a safe or buying a stand and building, because they're just much less likely to have drama, where the rules change and you're affected and you're on the wrong side of the new rules, and then you lose a bunch of money. So there's a lot of trapped capital in Zim that is being allocated to property, because property so far has not touch wood.
Yeah, and when you talk to investors, institutions, so when they're going into property, they're not chasing a return.
It's just capital preservation.
Capital preservation, because you're not quite sure when the tsunami will hit you again. And when it does hit you, like,
but that's the trauma, right?
That's the trauma.
Yeah. So although they're rushing, that's why I said the trauma lives with us.
It does. It does. And in fact, I really like the fact that everyone has actually learned something from it. So whether the institutions or households, they actually know that it's not a good idea to be leaving your money in the bank. There's so many in places where...
Says a guy whose business is capital markets.
No, but
that's
be honest.
the reality. What can I... Unless you want me to be advising people to do what I'm not doing. That's being unethical, I would love a situation where there's a lot of money in the bank.
Does it say you're in the wrong business?
I'm in the wrong country.
Okay, gentlemen, GMB has started to make payments for wheat deliveries. This is, some up to close to 2 years, and also because we're going into the winter wheat season, these are their efforts at cajoling wheat farmers to get in, but I don't think that they're gonna get the deliveries that they hope for. But these are minuscule payments that the Ministry of Finance is making. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, so why do we still have a GMB? Why do we control the price of wheat? That's
it's bewildering. Yeah,
I'm vexed by that, and all you do by not being honourable with the farmers and paying them on time is you just discourage them from deploying resources to wheat, right? If you can grow tobacco and get your hard currency and return without any red tape or headaches, in terms of delayed payments, why would you grow wheat?
Absolutely. Well, you could also grow flowers. Flower export earnings bloom by 18%. Zimbabwe's flower export earnings rose by 18% in 2024 to US 4.2 million, up from 3.6. I mean, it's still very small. I mean, when you compare it to, East Africa, more prominently Kenya and Ethiopia, they've really done wonders as far as horticulture is concerned, and flowers in particular. And Zim used to be second to South Africa as the largest exporter to the EU.
Until land reform.
Until land reform. Are we seeing, is this a comeback? Do you think we'll ever come back?
Yeah, we are seeing it's a comeback, some recovery. So there's quite a number of former farmers that are coming back. Probably not them, but their children, the younger generation that is coming back into farming. And it seems like quite a number of them are going into horticulture.
But it's still a small industry.
No,
I mean, they're exporting less than $80 million a year.
But you want to ask yourself a question that says, okay, how much were we exporting maybe 4 or 5 years from now?
Kondozi used to do, how many, what was...
But that was pre.
Yeah.
Remember, so let's forget about land reform, about pre-land reform. We know what happened. So this is
have we learned our lesson?
We have.
No, we haven't. We haven't given the farmers tenure.
If we didn't learn anything, then we have got a serious problem. But I think the fact that we are seeing some of the former farmers coming back, their children, and they're being given some leases on the land, whether whatever arrangement that are there, which we know, everyone knows that this is what is happening. I think that's an admission that these are people that maybe they know better in terms of doing that particular crop, access to markets, access to capital, and things like that. So it's going to take a bit of time, but it's progress.
I want to hear what you guys think, because there's a lot of theory around the DNA of farming. Is that when you look at Europe, it's the Dutch that are very prominent as farmers and have the gene, and then that was passed down to the Afrikaner in South Africa, and then that also led to the Zimbabwean farmers who came with that particular gene. Do you buy into that argument that the farming gene was Dutch and we were privileged to have that particular gene in Zimbabwe, and we should have done our best to protect it within the context of our land reform?
For me, that's the first time that I'm hearing it. I'm not quite sure, but I think if there's anything to be learned, it's probably not an issue of genes. Maybe the Dutch have been doing it for a very long time, and probably that was the only best thing that they could do at the time. I remember even when the introduction to like capital markets, they're talking about the tulips, and I think the Dutch that were into
growing,
that, that were growing that.
Well,
So,
even today, it's the Dutch, when you look
Yes.
across Europe, it's the Dutch that are more proficient and productive as far as farming is concerned.
So I think the biggest
I don't think genes have anything to do with it. I think so. If you look at economic history over the last few centuries, although the UK gets the credit for turbocharging the Industrial Revolution, remember William of Orange was Dutch. And the Netherlands had kind of made.
They were the first.
They were the first to really move
Capital markets as well as
capital formation, industrialization, and they built an ecosystem that worked, that made the Netherlands quite wealthy at the time. And then when William of Orange fled for the UK, he basically took that ethos with him, and that's why the Industrial Revolution then happened in the UK, and the rest is
first the agricultural revolution.
yeah. So that's, I think it's just a historical. It's an accident of history. I don't think it's got anything to do with genetics.
So how would you explain it now that it's the Dutch that are more proficient and have a competitive advantage across Europe?
Well, if you look, if you think about it globally, for example,
let's look at Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no.
And within Europe, it's the Dutch farmers that do phenomenally well, better than
So I think
Spaniards and everybody else.
So because the agricultural revolution took off in a meaningful way for the first time in the Netherlands, they just have the heritage, right? They've just been doing it much longer. They've got this institutional expertise and excellence. I don't think it's genetic.
Heritage, institution, that's where it comes from. That's genetic.
Well, I don't know. But yeah,
there's something special. I mean, you have to accept it.
I think it's consistency. You do something
But
for a long time.
Are the Spaniards not consistent?
Look, I haven't read anything about them, but maybe...
Are the Greeks not consistent?
No. Like in that particular trade, maybe the Dutch have been very consistent in terms of their, role in agriculture. So, because some of these things you learn along the way, right? So imagine if you pass it to your next generation, and it goes on in 5 generations from now. All that needs to be learned about this particular crop or trade is already learned to a point that the mistakes are going to be minimal. Just look at us right now when you're trying to go into farming, like at a commercial scale. We're still making very, very elementary mistakes that are not really that just shows.
Because we're trying to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
No, but if you actually think about Zimbabwean farmers, right, it's not that all of the white farmers were great farmers, right? A lot of after World War II, a lot of white immigrants were given land And they failed, right? There were more than 100,000 commercial farmers initially, and then over time, as the guys who weren't good at farming, their operations blew up. The really good farmers, increased their land holdings, buying from the guys who were going bankrupt. And by the time you get to land reform, you only have 4,000 commercial
the more
farmers.
reason why those particular 4,000 farmers, you should have taken them as a group of exceptional men.
They were exceptional farmers.
Yeah, they were
incredibly productive.
Meritocracy was such that these were now, after 100 years, these were your best farmers.
Absolutely, I agree.
And there was no reason to then destroy that.
Yeah, no.
And I'm just saying that now you're trying, what Zia is trying to do, because he's the farmer, the weekend farmer, is he's trying to... He's trying to replicate,
lose money.
He's trying to replicate 400-500 years worth of
generational knowledge and farming,
institutional knowledge of lineage that finds the land attractive and is really ingrained in farming. And I think that the Dutch have got, the special sauce, whatever, for better or worse. I mean, similarly with the UK in financial services, they've taken it to the next level. And I think that it was during the, Napoleon years, and I think they've really captured that as their thing. Similarly with, the Greeks and, retail shopping. Yeah. And I think that if we start from there and look at Zimbabwe, and we ask ourselves the important question around what is it that is really unique about Zimbabweans, and we build on that heritage rather than us continuously trying to find new things. Let's build on a heritage that is natural to us. I think that will do very well. Ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think. Are we talking nonsense or there's something there? Now, let's talk about schools. And here we essentially want to talk about the urban schools.
Yeah, I saw there was a very raging debate on X.
Yes.
And some very nasty comments about Tinashe and how he's become very, very, less practical in the way he looks at things. If he could have his way, he was going to, he was going to just sell everything, and all the good things that. I think to sum it up, they're saying you're taking this capitalistic mind very far, even areas that are social.
Okay, let's interrogate. So you have a school like Borodal Primary School or Venona or Avondale, and in the olden days when we were growing up, we lived in the neighborhood and we were the feeding trough to those particular schools. But what has happened now is those schools are in good neighborhoods, but the community
on prime property,
and the community is no way involved in the running of the school. In fact, 80% or more of the kids are now actually coming outside of the particular location, and my argument is this is prime land, but not only just that. When you look at the population growth and when you look at densification that's already happening in these areas, it's only a matter of time when you have a crisis. And we also see the crisis with a lot of these homes that are being turned into schools. And it really breaks my heart. And I can't understand why...
You have a heart.
I can't understand why communists...
I thought capitalists didn't have hearts. That's what we are learning on X.
I'm playing to their heartstrings, right? The socialists or the communists always argue that, we don't have hearts. Oh, okay. If they do have hearts, are they okay with kids going into a home...
Into failing schools, yeah.
Into failing schools and into homes that have been turned into schools, and you pay exorbitant amounts. I mean, you pay something like $1,000 a month, because you can't find accommodation. And you have a school like Avondale that is prime property, and all they just need to do is to just expand their classes, which really, if they were to partner with the community or to get private investors, that would be very possible. So I will start with you because you're our local resident communist, so you might understand these things better than...
He identifies as a social democrat. I don't know what that means, but he might take offense to being called a communist.
Because the real poor are actually in the rural areas. there's no one you can consider poor in Borodale who own or who should be the custodians of this community school. And if they were to drive change, Borodale will be able to increase intake, will be able to increase the infrastructure, and the pricing will be way cheaper than what these homeschools are charging. Why would you have a problem with that?
Who said I've got problems with that? So
ilk.
So I went to schools in Kumusha, Mshagwa, right? Mm-hmm. And I've got no regrets. So those were schools that were making sense for us at that time, and we were getting the education that I believe was good for us at the time. And these were like community schools, so even in terms of the expectations were in line with the community.
The local community.
So there's no way that the school would have asked me to say, we want you to have rugby equipment or cricket equipment or whatever. We just had football, netball, and volleyball. So the football, we would just kick it even without any soccer boots. It made sense. So all I'm trying to say is there are schools for every community. So I totally agree with you that community schools must actually cater for the community, because this thing of maybe kids having to drive from across town to come to a school in Avondale, for me, it doesn't sit well. You know, the idea that a child can actually get onto 2 combis from where they come from, get into town, then town to Avondale, and then they do that in grade 1, grade 2. What are we trying to achieve? And the fact that maybe people are living in those communities, I think the noise must be, we want schools in those communities. And so if there are schools in those communities, I think people must just go to their communities. And I agree with you to a point that schools in certain neighborhoods, I think they should be pitched, they should be, the services must be sold in line with what the communities are doing. But even that, the examples that you are giving, now you have got people from Avondale that are staying within the Avondale area that are actually moving away, looking for schools elsewhere. Because now what is Avondale right now, it's actually of a lower standard to their expectation, because maybe the school is charging $100. Why is it charging $100? It wants to accommodate everyone. So I think there are schools, or there should be schools in every community. And the school must be in line with the lifestyle and the social standing of each particular community.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it from our resident communist. But anyway,
yeah, look, I completely agree with Tinashe's take. I'm very libertarian in this regard. I don't think that the state should be in the business of running schools. I think communities should be in the business of running their schools, and the state maybe should. Their role is really to be a regulator to stop, abuse and bad behavior. But
the state can run schools in Chipinge.
No, but
like,
why
can't a Chipinge community?
Like the poor schools.
The poor schools.
The poor schools. Basically. The state can.
The state can run. These are like $10 per term kind of schools.
So
they can run them.
Zia, where I go one further than you. So you can actually call me more Marxist and more communist than you. Is that
you're coming out now?
I actually don't have a problem with people coming from Chitungwiza to a school in Avondale.
But they have to pay.
Exactly.
Policies can't be
We can't then
be framed on the basis of those
of kids from Zengezi.
In fact, I'll even go a step further and say, okay, look at a school like your, it's Prince Edward, right? It's charging the right fee, but nothing stops the school from saying, you know what, we are creating some sort of a scholarship fund. So for the kids that are outstanding in certain areas,
exactly,
then those ones can come from all those, So for
disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yeah.
But I think that essentially what we want to do, because you've got prime real estate, where you could increase the uptake at Avondale Primary School to 2,000 kids. If you introduce private capital, That is very possible. Then you can actually take care of the community as well as anyone else who believes that the school is giving, the right education that one needs. Because right now, when you look at the waiting list at Avondale, it's ridiculous. And the waiting list at Borodale Primary School is ridiculous. Right.
Well, this is what happens with price controls, right? You only have shortages for a commodity or a good when you have price controls, right? And you know how I feel about price controls. The thing about a lot of these bleeding heart socialist ideas and policies is that they've got really noble aspirations and intentions, right? What they're hoping to achieve is fantastic, and I'm with I tend to agree with the aspirations and intentions, but the outcomes in reality from such policies are never noble, sadly.
Absolutely.
Right? They're always appalling, and that's what we're seeing, right?
Okay. Then let's go to universities. So this idea that we just continuously churn out these commerce, humanities graduates that eventually become vendors.
But you're a humanities graduate.
Yeah. Commerce graduate, but what I'm saying is it's a useless degree, especially in the context of Zimbabwe. And actually, I can see beyond just where I am and what I've done. And I'm saying that the privilege that I've had to go to university around the world is because I'm able to pay for it and not be subsidized by the taxpayer. And I think that it's quite egregious that as a taxpayer, you decide at Form 4 that you have, rather the schooling system such that you fail O levels. And then you're forced into the workforce and into some sort of trade. And then you start earning money, and then the state takes from you and gives it to some guy who wants to study for a BA in history at university and subsidizes that guy. I think it's egregious, and I don't understand that mindset. Also, given that universities, by their very nature, are extremely elite. The Industrial Revolution didn't happen because of the number of universities in the UK. In fact, a lot of the universities were polytechnics, and then they were turned into universities later on when the country was developed. America didn't develop because of the universities that were there. In fact, universities were very elite by their very nature. Industry was driven by men of sweat, blood, and tears. That is what builds civilization and what builds factories. We look at China as an example again. Those factories were not built by the number of universities that were in China. Those factories are pumping because people were willing to do the work. And it had nothing to do with university education. Am I wrong, gentlemen?
No, you'll find complete agreement from me. It's the commies who think that every child is entitled to university education, notwithstanding their aptitude, their talents.
Are you sure you are even characterizing the communist world even in that argument that they're saying every child is entitled to?
The state must pay for it. It doesn't. That's the mindset, isn't it?
So it's very elite. It's only 0.01%
so I think
who manage to go to university. And why should they be subsidized by the state?
So when you look at the whole university and the school thing, you can't sort of decouple it from the economic deterioration that we've seen in the past 2 decades. So, for example, there's the proliferation of schools in the homes. There are so many trained teachers who are out of jobs. At a personal level, I know quite a number. People that left teachers training colleges more than 10 years ago that had never been employed. And so you'd find that partly some of the schools are actually being, is because there is so much supply of teachers, and don't think it's actually urban area problems.
Yeah, I know.
Even in the rural areas. Yeah, even in the rural areas.
So we're not better off funding tradesmen, funding.
Okay, so I haven't really finished making my argument. So that is from the school. Same thing also goes to the universities. So the universities were sort of partially commercialized. So when government said, maybe we can give you a grant up to this extent, for the rest you have to look after yourselves. So now that really sort of affected their focus from training college graduates to just say, let's have as many. So the competition is now about how many students do you have on campus. So obviously you can't have, the numbers that we have there, for example, MSU 31,000. You can't have 31,000 of medical students or engineering. It's just not possible. But you can just overnight, you can wake up with a class with, say, 1,000 people studying the humanities that you are talking about. So there is that element of them trying to raise money from the students.
But it's still not viable. If they were charging, if Midlands with 31,000 kids was charging a viable fee, so if they were charging them, 2,000, 3,000, then suddenly it starts becoming viable.
Because it's still partially subsidized.
And I'm saying that's actually the problem, because as taxpayers, then I should decide who I subsidize and who I don't.
Then also there's also an element of employment creation. Yeah. So when I went to varsity, in our department, I think there were like 2 full-time lecturers. Then the rest were coming from the industry. It wasn't such a lucrative kind of job for one to do. One would do it out of passion. So you'd find at our time some fund managers or stockbrokers were coming to teach us, and etc. I know specifically after 2008, right? So all these graduates that had just come out of varsity and couldn't find jobs
became lecturers.
They became lecturers.
Yeah. I think we have a big problem there, because when you look at some of the work that we're involved in, when you look at people who have some sort of trade in South Africa, there's huge demand for them. In Australia, huge demand for them. And essentially we should be producing more of them. But when you look at the Polytechnic, especially Harare Polytechnic, by the way, which is producing some stellar graduates, but unfortunately it's not as supported as we should. And we really should increase its intake.
But the question is, if the economy is not pumping,
export. When you look at
the biggest problem. So poly programs are practical programs, right? So you'd have a situation where it's a 3-year program, 1 year in, 1 year out on attachment, and the 3rd year in you then graduate. Most of the students were now struggling with the 1 year in, the way you have to go for attachment, because the industry, there's no industry to talk about.
Because we're favoring the university graduates.
No.
So look at all the polytechnics.
These were like welders. Or how do you favor university graduates? It's not like there's a welder from university.
No, I think welders will always find.
No.
I think Ranga's right.
No,
we've destroyed our industrial base.
Destroyed the industrial base. So let me tell you what.
What I'm saying is, if government were to support, so look at the statistics.
The learning process. The economy has to be very well. Do you know one of the most difficult areas to get into is apprenticeship? Do you know how difficult it is to
because
get in?
industries are just not performing. I totally get that.
Do you know, so it's actually easier to get into university than to get into an apprentice for some of these.
Look, our polytechnics total enrollment. It's 25,000. MSU on its own is 31,000. We have a problem. And we may not have a solution.
I think Great Zimbabwe is about 30,000. So I agree.
Great Zimbabwe is 30,000 students.
It's 35.
35,000.
It has got more than MSU. So I think where I'm agreeing with you at the policy level is, I think we need to stop this massive enrollment at universities.
Gentlemen, how is it possible that Great Zimbabwe University in Masvingo has 35,000 students? Do they even have a campus?
But there were 35,000.
You're going to upset some people, Tinashe, and make us.
So that's our cue.
Get us into trouble.
Okay, the reason why, I know we're joking.
But before we go, what are we recommending?
No, what we get out of the education business.
What are we recommending?
I think that universities should be able to charge commercial rates. And then let's focus more on the polytechnics, and not just the polytechnics, but really on technical skills. And where there are shortages in terms of industry, let's see how best we can twin ourselves to South Africa, to Australia, to where our graduates are going, because they are in high demand right across the world. But anyway, we're not saying we're here to just ask the right questions. We're not necessarily here to then answer those questions. But I think that if we start asking the right questions, then we can get society talking. And sometimes that's what I do. It's not necessarily because I've got all the answers, but I'm just asking the right questions. And it might sound, incendiary or
sometimes you feed
bombastic,
the trolls.
But it's really to get the conversation going. And it's surprising, the number of inboxes I get from all sorts of people and this is the problem I have with the socialists, especially on X, is that they dominate the conversation so much.
Do they?
That the sane voices don't want to come out because they're like, oh, we'll get attacked for ideas.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I actually don't come across a lot of socialists in my feed.
Oh no, just read my feed. I think Zia has actually been reading. You haven't been reading, but in fact, when he started the conversation, he knew exactly where we were coming from. But I think that let's have a balance. I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I'm just saying that in our discussions, let's create a platform in which there are lots of people who think that the schooling system and the university system is wrong. But I think that muzzling their voices does not help us at all as a society. These are questions that we need answers for, but let's start with the questions and let's start the debate. We may not have the answers, but certainly let's get the debate going. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this was a wonderful show. I'm glad we were back in studio and I enjoyed this.
Yeah, and this wine is quite good. Thank you so much, Gloria.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Gloria. You forgot about us, but that's okay. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.